Roland here. Uh, Thank you very much for everyone for joining us tonight here at the Dearborn Public Library program, Zoom program with Ron Shelton and Jim Burnstein to talk about Ron's new terrific book and the making of Bull Durham. The format for tonight is that we'll have a conversation, say like for about 55 minutes, and then have a Q&A session afterwards for about 10 minutes. There's a button down at the bottom of the screen, Q&A. You can submit your questions during the talk or afterwards if you'd like, and we'll try to get as many as we can during the time allotted. And now to introduce our guests, it's a real honor to introduce the following two men tonight as we discuss Mr. Shelton's book, The Church of Baseball, The Making of Bull Durham, Home Runs, Bad Calls, Crazy Fights, Big Swings, and a Hit. Mr. Ron Shelton is an Oscar-nominated screenwriter and director of Bull Durham. Some of his other films that he's written and directed include White Man Can't Jump, Blaze, Cobb, and Tin Cup, which I all highly recommend. His conversation partner tonight will be Mr. Jim Burnstein. Mr. Burnstein is the director of the screenwriting program at the University of Michigan. His screenwriting credits include Renaissance Man, D3, The Mighty Ducks, and Love and Honor, co-written with Garrett Schiff. So I'm going to hand it off to Jim, and let's get the conversation started.
This is great. So when I was a young screenwriter, Gordie Howe gave me the best professional advice I've ever received. He said, never stop being a fan of the game you're in. Never has that statement rang more true than tonight. As someone who has written, sold, and made his fair share of movies, I would throw Ruffian in there as well, set in the world of sports, I believe Ron Shelton is the absolute master of this game. He's the gold standard for the rest of us and as good as it gets, with 3 films on everybody's list of greatest sports movies of all times, including Tin Cup, White Man Can't Jump, and Bull Durham, the subject of Mr. Shelton's new book, The Church of Baseball. And you've given the subtitle, Dan, so I'm going to jump in. Let's begin with the title itself and how it relates to your own religious upbringing and the fact that you didn't even have a television until you were 12.
Well, the church, when you grow up in my case, a Baptist church, an evangelical church, even though I was in Southern California, which is a little looser and freer interpretation of church and other doctrines in a lot of places. And it's still, the roots were Texas, where my father was from, in Bakersfield, which is kind of rock-ribbed oil and cotton country. So church was a critical part. We never missed Sunday school, never missed church. Prayed before meals. But it was a kind of a church, even though my father was a good conservative Nixonian Republican, he was just vehemently fought for civil rights, for women's rights, believed in science, believed that the book of Genesis was poetry, not science. I mean, it's simply different than what one thinks of as much of the evangelical world today. So yes, I grew up in the church, but it was a different church.
And there was one Sunday where you skipped church.
Yes, one Sunday that the book spends some time on, where we were all fans of, more than that, we worshiped Eddie Matthews because he was from our hometown, my hometown of Santa Barbara, California, which is about 2 hours north of Los Angeles. And Eddie was our star. And he went to the high school I went to, and when I was a high school player, I won the batting title, which was an Eddie Matthews bat, which I still have. Probably the only trophy I still have. And every kid wanted to be Eddie Matthews, and we worshiped the Milwaukee Braves because that was his team. And one day, and I know this exactly because you could look it up, as Casey says, you could look up the date of the game. The Braves were in the World Series in 1957 against the mighty Yankees. And we didn't have a television. They were down 2-1, and the fourth game was going to be on Sunday. And we went to church, of course, wouldn't think of watching a game because we didn't have a TV to watch it anyway. And after Sunday school, my father shoved me and my younger brothers and my pregnant mother into the big beat up station wagon and raced home. And as a good evangelical, I was sure God was going to intervene and we were all going to hell. Some of you may know what the rapture is to certain people. That's when Jesus makes the second coming and all the believers rise up from earth to meet him, and everybody else is in car crashes and fires and in hell. Well, I was sure my parents would be lifted up and me and my younger brothers were going to crash and die. Well, it didn't happen. We got home and a man was installing a television for us because we had forgotten it was the fourth game of the World Series. And we watched terrified, and that God was going to come down any moment. The rapture was going to happen. And in the bottom of the 10th inning, Eddie Matthews hit a 3-run home run to win the game for the Milwaukee Braves. And as I say in the book, we started to go to church less and less after that moment.
That's pretty much where the title, The Church of Baseball, comes from, right? I mean, where you refer to that as in the book. I think that's such an amazing story. Now, for the record, I'm convinced your career as a minor league ball player and the lessons you learned making it all the way up to AAA provided the best possible training for your future career as a screenwriter. But you didn't start as Ron Shelton in the big leagues. You started as Wayne Shelton. Can you tell us how fate smiled upon this character?
Well, I first of all, I agree that the training of being a professional athlete is the best for what I do, best possible training. I never went to film school. 5 years in the minors, that's all I need to know. Besides where the first and second act break should fall naturally. Yeah. But that can be taught. I signed out of Los Angeles International Airport and was on three flights all night to get to Bluefield, West Virginia, in the coal country, in the Appalachian League. And I got to the hotel at 7 a.m, having not slept. And the entire roster was coming down to get into cabs and go to the ballpark to work out. And a man comes up to me and says, "Hi, my name is Ron Shelton. Who are you?" And I thought, oh, they must have found out I'm coming from California, boy. And I thought he was joking. And it turns out he really was Ron Shelton. So I was Ron Shelton number 2. So in other words, not only did you not have a job, you didn't even have your name. You know? So I quickly adopted my middle name, which was Wayne, and made the team. And in the starting lineup overnight, I started the shortstop as Wayne Shelton, having flown from LA as Ron Shelton the night before. That's the sort of lesson you have to adapt to quickly, both in baseball and in movies, I'd say.
Absolutely. And a guy got hurt, right? For you to go out there.
Yeah.
And then you played a great game. And so your job.
That's it. That's how it works. You just don't get hurt. Ask Wally Pipp.
Right. Exactly. So, one more background question about you. And that's life, like movies, has turning points. Tell us about the turn your life took in Little Rock, what you call your road to Damascus.
Well, there's the biblical references again. You know, the Jesuits said, give me the child from 1 to 5 and you can have the rest of your life.
Right.
And the Jesuits are pretty smart about that stuff. Well, I would go to movies in the minor leagues to get out of the hotel. Hotels weren't great. Air conditioning wasn't great. Like in that theater, you saw the movie. And ball players used to like to watch soap operas, which I couldn't tolerate because my mother watched them, and that's the last thing I wanted to do would be. And the ball players would divide up, and they're like Edge of Night or As the World Turns or General Hospital, whatever. There were factions, so I'd go to movies, and without never having read, James A.G. or Pauline Kael, I just went to watch the story. And I went across the street in Little Rock to a Sam Peckinpah Western called The Wild Bunch. And it just kind of blew my head off. And I thought, this is different than any movie I'd ever seen. There was so much going on in it, not just viscerally, which there certainly was, but there were ideas going on. And ideas that kept shifting, excuse me, shifting and change. And the narrative kept moving in directions that were surprising and inevitable, which is my goal always, to make them surprising and inevitable. And I went to that movie every night, and I brought other players every day. I went to it, played ball at night. And to them, it was just another Western with a big shoot 'em up at the end. But to me, something was going on. And that kind of made me start watching movies differently, and led me to want to know how they were made and how they were written and how you shot them and what were the great ones. So I became much more serious film watcher then, not knowing I would later become a filmmaker. But Sam Peckinpah is the guy that turned me around.
Right. And so just again, for the record, you decided to leave baseball when you were traded to the Toledo Mud Hens, the Detroit Tigers AAA team. I just want to get out there for our Detroit fans and realize you could have played for us, and who knows, maybe even for Billy Martin. So here we go.
Well, that would be one reason I wouldn't have wanted to play for the Jets. I talk about regrets at the end of the book. I don't pretend I don't have any. I would have, in retrospect, I would have reported, because Baltimore was loaded in those days. That was, keep in mind, in '69, they had 4 20-game winners on one team at the same year.
Remember.
They had so many Books Robinson and Boog and Frank Robinson and Boog Powell and Earl Weaver and Jim Palmer. And give me a break. And they were the winningest team in baseball for 20 years, the Orioles. And they were the gold standard, really. And the Detroit was in a bit of a down streak, although I think they had Mickey Lolich, but I don't think those were the great Detroit years. They were just after them or something. I can't quite remember. But I know that they weren't strong in the middle infield. I thought I might have had a shot, but I found a new muse, put it that way. And also the strike of '72 was the real reason, because there was no spring training. And the word was there was going to be no season. And the season didn't even start on time. And I had to make a decision. And I decided to go back to school.
Right. So talking about the writing of Bull Durham now, for just a few seconds, would you please discuss your private writing rules, which I just wish every one of my students copied?
Well, if you're talking structure or just philosophical.
Nope. Your approach when you get up in the morning.
Yeah, I start writing at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I make sure I write until lunchtime. Now, and then I get out. I'll take, to this day, I'm in Santa Monica, my office. I'll take a mile or two walk at lunch, and I'll come back. And sometimes I'll keep writing if I'm energized, or I'll make notes on it. Or in my case, I have other production issues to deal with or business issues to deal with. It's like a farmer going to the fields, and I don't care if pages come out. I write through. I don't believe in writer's block. When you don't know what you're doing, just keep writing, because you may discover something. The trash can is 3 feet away. That's easy, or it's a delete button now. Just keep doing it. Don't wait for the muse. Amateurs wait for the muse. Professionals ignore the muse.
Exactly.
I think, again, baseball or sports is a model. What do I could tell the manager? I don't feel like hitting today at 7:30. Can I come back at 9? The game is on, folks.
Right.
And you're being. So the other one of my rules I probably mentioned is, and I used to have a screensaver. It's not there anymore, but it says write fast, don't think. And what I mean by that is, I've done the staring and the thinking too often at dinner with other people or with my wife or my children. When I'm ready to start writing, it just has to go. And some version of Hemingway said, write drunk, edit sober. So that he means both literal and metaphoric by that, by the way.
Yeah.
Just get it out there. Then you can step back and say, it's terrible, or there's a couple gems in there, or shockingly, this works better than I thought. Your reaction will be all of the above.
Right. And I just think that's what a professional does, and you write it beautifully in the book. Now, A Player to Be Named Later, the name by which Crash Davis introduces himself in the movie, is the title of a screenplay you wrote that contained the seeds of Bull Durham. It also served as your calling card into the industry and your first sale, sort of. This is the type of crazy story every professional screenwriter can relate to. Can you describe what happened with producer Ed Pressman?
Well, first of all, Ed Pressman is a famous and great producer. He's very eccentric, to put it mildly, but he's not your bling wearing, Porsche driving. He went to Stanford. He went to the London School of Economics. His family owned Pressman Toys. He invented Triamonos, whatever the hell that is. He was a very bright guy, but very eccentric. And he bought or optioned for $10,000 A Player to Be Named Later. And A Player to Be Named Later, and then we discovered that he didn't have any money, or that his funds came from a different source, his mother actually, who ran the toy company, for his staff. And he needed a story editor. So my agent, who I finally found one, said, well, hire Ron for $300 a week as story editor in lieu of paying him the $10,000. So I became the story editor for for Ed Pressman, having never really sold anything. Most of my scripts I burned, so nobody would ever see them because I knew they weren't any good. And now I'm passing judgment on some top writers in the business, which is completely ludicrous and unfair to them.
But you did see what makes a great script and what isn't worth reading. That's a pretty good, way of learning, right?
Yeah, I think the 9 months I was his story editor was, besides playing baseball, was my other film school.
Right.
Because a good writing, as I say, jumps off the page immediately on page one. And it may be a script, and I've got some of those out there that just doesn't work in the marketplace, or you can't get financed because it's not commercial, or it's uncastable. But the writing is still good, I promise you. And every top screenwriter has lots of those. I'm sure you do. Oh, yeah. I like, as you know, I like Ruffian. I was talking to somebody about it recently, but I'm a little busy, and I love the story of Ruffian. So I lost my train of thought here, but it was
about learning from reading other scripts.
Oh yeah, so good writing jumps off the page. Doesn't mean it's makeable, but even then I would go to Ed and say, look, here's the script. I don't know if it's commercial or not. You have to decide that. That's above my pay grade. But this is a writer we should meet. This is,
right.
We'll give him a book that we like. And the script that just jumped off the page was Platoon by a guy named Oliver Stone. And we couldn't get it made in the year I was there. And Ed had to let the rights go, and then Orion picked it up and it made $450 million. But you could tell that it was written by a guy who, in the trenches of Vietnam, if I wrote the trenches of Vietnam, it would have been phony. Wrote baseball, it would have been phony. And so the oldest advice in the business, write what you know.
Right. And once you had 2 writing credits under your belt with Under Fire and The Best of Times, now you have the desire to direct, and you pitched Bull Durham. And it's one of the best pitches I've ever seen. Can you just basically give us what you said?
In those days, excuse me, the business was not corporate driven. Now it's corporate driven. 200 hours work before you even pitch it. They want to see it outlined. They want to see the breakdown. They want to see character sketches ad nauseum. And idea that is rich enough that a smart producer will say, this guy. Whatever city it was, who Athens, I don't know where, who said withheld their sexual, trying to force them into not to go to war, and thought Lysistrata in the minor league sounds like an interesting idea. So I did go in to pitch it to a man named Tom Mount, and because I'd heard that Tom knew something and might have owned a piece of a minor league team. That's what I'd heard. And he was supposed to be very literate. And I went in and I miracle in Hollywood. And he knew the minor leagues. He actually did own a small piece of the minor league team, and ultimately many minor league teams. So I had a guy who thought, okay. And then he said, well, what else do you have? Like, that isn't a fully realized pitch as you would get to him. And I said, well, I knew it had to be about two players, because there has to be push-pull. You have to be, desire and obstacle or opposition. It's all about opposition. This whole storytelling of opposition, force of opposition. And it couldn't be a left fielder and a first baseman because they'd never have any interaction. So it had to be a pitcher and catcher. That was a practical consideration. And then I said, and a woman tells the story, because my wife, my first wife, had always said, you ought to write a story from a woman's point of view about baseball. And I thought I'd get killed for it because I was not a woman. And but that was it. That was the entire pitch. And Tom said, great, go write it.
And
Jump would never happen today, would it?
it'd be a tough sell, but if they had a smart exec, they'd take a swing at it. And so, and I like what you write about that you often have to hear a character speak in your own head before you can learn who they are. So if you could just tell us how you got to know Annie Savoy by hearing her voice on the road to Asheville, North Carolina.
I was driving around the Carolina League and the Sally League, the South Atlantic League it's called, these old towns and these old ballparks. And it's sort of the southern version of the Rust Belt, turning into the Rust Belt. These towns, the mills were closing up, the tobacco industry was dying. And so all these towns were kind of desperate. And I have a micro disc recorder with me often, and I took the back roads to Asheville from Durham. Why? Because there was an old ballpark in Asheville, and it was Thomas Wolfe's hometown. I thought, why not Asheville? So they're old minor league town. And I drove, and I thought, well, what would this woman sound like? And I gave her the line, I believe in the Church of Baseball, thinking back to my father, who, by the way, as he eased out of the church, would talk about the Church of Baseball, the Church of Music, the Church of Jazz, the Church of this, the Church of that. So it became a widely adaptable term. And I wrote, I believe in the Church of Baseball, and then I kept driving, and then I picked it up. I've worshiped all the major religions and most of the minor ones, Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma. And that was just the kind of thing in the late 80s. I came out of the 60s and the 70s, and I had a lot of friends, especially women, who had kind of worked their way through all the religions, and they're all in search of a belief system,
right,
and was going from one to the other without judgment. It wasn't like they'd found God. They'd always, this is working now. This will work as long as it works. And so it was out of great respect for the eternal search. I'm on one, always. And by the time I got to Asheville, I had the whole thing written in a matter of minutes, start and stop. And then when I got back to LA, and it was a couple of months later, I pulled it out of my bag and I said, what was that thing I dictated? And I typed it. And I gave her the name Annie because the baseball Annies are the famous groupies. And I typed it out and I thought, well, that works pretty well, doesn't it? Who knew? That's write fast, don't think again.
Right.
And I wrote the whole script without an outline.
Right. And everybody loved the screenplay and everybody passes.
Yeah.
So just describe how Kevin Costner, before he was fully Kevin Costner, turned out to be a real key to getting the movie made.
Well, they passed with Kevin Costner attached. I managed to get Kevin Costner attached through luck. I knew an agent, repped him. She liked it. She liked me. She knew me from something else and thought I was a director in the waiting. That helped. Kevin liked the script a lot. He had a 30-day window before he had to commit to something else that he didn't want to do. A good project, actually. Yep. And so we were very confident, and we got turned down by everybody. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And so Kevin couldn't believe it. And he said, well, set those meetings again. Well, I'll go with you. So we went out and met many of them. We had a second meeting. Some of them didn't want to meet twice. And they all liked the script, by the way. They thought baseball, minor leagues, first-time director, you know, life's too short, and no foreign sales. Baseball's does not sell foreign. We go out and we get turned down again. And now it's the day before, it's day 29 of the 30 days. And it's a real deadline. He's got to deal with Warner Brothers. If we don't nail him by 6 o'clock on Friday, he's on the Warner Brothers, signing the Warner Brothers contract Monday. Well, so he and I are sitting in my temporary office next to the copy machine, like that guy Rob Schneider used to do on Saturday Night Live. I didn't even have an office. And I had a pickup truck and I was getting a divorce. I mean, my life was a complete mess. And he's sitting there with me and it's 5 o'clock. And he says, I wonder if the guys are still in New York for Orion Pictures. Now, often in those days before the digital world, executives were in their offices at 8 o'clock at night answering phone calls. Not true now, everybody's on the phone. So we called, and I had made a movie, Under Fire, with Orion, and they liked me and they liked the movie. It wasn't a hit here, but it was a hit in Europe. And he had a movie called No Way Out with Orion Pictures that was opening the next day, which I didn't know. So we called, and the two of their partners said, well, send the script over, we'll read it tonight. And Kevin said, no, we have to have an answer by tomorrow. These days, you can email it in 3 keystrokes. We called his agency, the William Morris office. They sent over 2 hard copies. The next day at noon, I get the call from the last studio passing, but Orion was still out there, and I started packing up my desk. I'm done. And they called the late great Eric Pleskow and Bill Burnstein. And we want to make this. What's the budget? I told them, do we really have to make a deal today? And I said, yes, that's real. And we made a deal that day. And the producer was in Paris doing a Polanski movie, and so they had to chase him down. By Monday, we had paperwork, and 5 weeks later, we were shooting the movie. That's an absolutely true story.
Only in Hollywood. It's just the last at bat. Right.
And as you know, you can't do that anymore. It's too many. It hasn't. And the AI robots and the demographics and the committees have to, none of that anymore.
Right. Well, you write that directing a movie is 50% the cast and 50% the script. Well, you have Kevin Costner at Crash, but it's almost impossible to believe in retrospect that getting Susan Sarandon as Annie and Tim Robbins as Ebby Calvin LaLouche, aka Nuke, was no slam dunk. Can you tell that story?
Well, first of all, I'll get to the Susan in a minute, but it was very hard to find Nuke. Every woman who came in for Annie Savoy was great. we just were dealing with the studio, kept changing who was approved and who wasn't. So we figured sooner or later we'd solve that one. Nuke was tough. Why? Somebody needed to be athletic and he needed to be very different from Kevin. This is a really important thing about casting, because a lot of guys came in and they were really good, but they looked like Kevin at 20 instead of, and Kevin, we already had Kevin at 37. We didn't. So if Annie had to choose between young Kevin and old Kevin, she'd choose the mature Kevin. So you had to find somebody different in every way. And in came, on a day we had 42 people to cast, if you can believe it, 42 people to read. Tim came in, he's about 6'5". He's got a boyish face, he's very physical presence. And I thought, boy, that is really different than Kevin, you know? And then we had to fight for him because I didn't realize he had one movie to his credit, Howard the Duck, which he didn't, or nobody told me about. It was the biggest flop of the decade.
Right.
And he was the co-lead, but I didn't know any of that. I just thought he's pretty good. And I put him and Kevin in a room, and I thought that will work. Those two guys will work together because they're so different. The irony is that Tim was having trouble embracing Nuke, who's never read a book, and he's a theater major from UCLA, grew up in Greenwich Village, and he's producing Bertolt Brecht plays. I said, Nuke is the guy reading Brecht, and Kevin's the guy, you know. So it was really funny that way. And I just had to, my only note to Tim ever was when he questioned Nuke's character, I said, look, Nuke has dignity. He knows things we don't know. He's not, can't be embarrassed. He's above the pettiness. He's got a gift. He really does. And Annie brings that out in him. I said, but, you know, the thing about Nuke is that his dignity is important. We don't want to make fun of him. I like Nuke. Nuke matters to me. We all have a little Nuke in us. I said, so when you are as Nuke reading a comic book, read it as if you're reading Brecht. And he thought that was a good note, and he took it around.
That's great. And then how did Sarandon work her way into the lineup?
Well, because she was not on the approved list, and the book talks a lot about the list, and you, Jim, know about the list because they change every day and it's maddening. Each studio has a different one, and this person's hot and they're cold, and on the list, off the list. So she wasn't approved for reasons beyond me. And so she told her agent she was flying over to audition anyway from Italy to LA. It's a pretty long flight with her 2-year-old child and a nanny, all on her own dime. And I said, well, if she comes from Italy, of course we'll meet with her. I'm not going to be disrespectful, but that doesn't mean I don't write the checks. I don't make, you know, I advocate for casting, but I'm not the only voice. And she gets off the plane. She comes to the office. I had Kevin there, and she just blows everybody away. She was in this tube dress that just, you know, the guys were dazzled. She knew she was off book, which means she already knew her lines. She didn't even need a script. I mean, she owned the room. As we say, you know, as I tell actors or writers or directors, anybody who has to pitch anything, and I have to pitch more than actors have to audition, you've got to change the molecules in the room. You got to go in and have everybody say, oh my God, what was that? How do we get in business with that? That's the actor's job. And she did it. The problem was she wasn't on the list. And it was a Friday. And we were about 3 weeks from shooting. And so I did what I always do when I don't know what to do, is pour a drink. And I had a nice bottle of my desk there, and Kevin was there, and the producer was there. And we said, well, what are we going to do? Because that's pretty great. And we sat there for an hour drinking this scotch. And the head of the studio called, and he said, I saw Susan Sarandon 2 weeks ago, and she looks great. Well, we knew he was lying because she was in Italy until an hour ago. She looks great. Why don't we put her on the list? We hired her immediately. I mean, that night. What had happened was, or the next day we hired her, she had gone from the meeting with me and Kevin and the producer to the studio, and worked her way up and down the hallways till she found all the executives who make these decisions. And she dazzled them, of course. And then she got on a plane and flew back to Italy with her daughter and her nanny. So she got back to Italy, and 2 days later, her neighbor came up and said, somebody's calling from Los Angeles. It was her manager, her agent, who said, you got the part, get on a plane to Durham, they're in pre-production. And that's honestly how it happened. And I tell that story to actors as well. We didn't, we got turned down by everybody twice. Susan wasn't even approved and she got the part. So tenacity is part of the gig.
It is. And when you find a part like that and you're an actor, you fight for it. And she got it.
Yeah.
So you assemble a really great team of veterans and some rookies in your key positions, above the line. You have Charles Minsky as DP, Louise Frogley as costume designer, Bob Layton as editor, Bonnie Timmerman as casting director, Armand Gans as production designer. But here's what jumped out to me as a fellow English major with no film school training, I might add, is that you picked your old English professor, Leonard Oakland, as your assistant. How and why the hell did that happen? I love this.
I went, when this evangelical college I went to, it wasn't sort of this extreme political right-wing place. It was conservative, but it was full of people like me who wondered how we got there, and some great teachers mixed into not so great teachers. In other words, it was like every other college, right?
Sure.
And Leonard Oakland was 6 years older than me. He was still getting his master's from Berkeley and in English Lit, and then later a PhD somewhere. And he had been my inspirational teacher my freshman year. He introduced me to poetry and we would go to movies together, foreign films and independent films and new wave films or Bergman or Kurosawa, all that stuff that wasn't in my DNA. And so he was an inspirational teacher, and I actually started to write a little bit, but mostly, I think I mentioned the book Nonsense Verse. I love Lewis Carroll and just playing with words. That's all it was. I was just having fun. And we'd stayed close. And even though he was now teaching in the state of Washington and with a full PhD and head of an English department, he was on a sabbatical and he didn't know what to do. And he says, I really don't know how I'm glad to have a year off grading papers, but I want to do something constructive. And I said, work for me. So, for $600 a week or whatever it was, he said, great. He came and he kept journals, and he was my drinking partner at night when I was howling at the moon, and probably a bit of a stable pony. And he said he didn't feel that he was very useful to me, but he was invaluable to me, which I clarify in the book. So he will finally understand that. So yes, that's how my English professor became my assistant.
I love that.
And he came up with the William Blake line.
Yep. Tell that.
Too. Well, we're late in the shooting. I mean, very late, near the very end. And there's a scene where Annie, who comes to bust into this boarding house kind of room, which is like I lived in AAA in Rochester, New York, and crashes, ironing a shirt, and he has a glass of scotch on the ironing board. Now that could have been me, I guarantee you. And she's in, and they have a very important scene. And when she arrived, she's coming straight from trying to seduce Nuke, and she's in an extremely short skirt with fishnets and a provocative, cleavage. And I thought, I may have to explain this to an audience, why she dresses like this, because it is extreme. And so I asked Leonard, this is the night before, I said, let's see, the palace. What is the line? The palace of wisdom leads to the, what is the line?
The road
to wisdom.
The road of excess, the road to excess.
Yeah. So I said to Leonard, who is seriously well-read, when people accuse me of being well-read, I said, yeah, I'm really well-read for a second baseman in the Texas League. I'm not really well-read for people I know who are well read. Okay, but I said I need a line about excess that. So this we have to address this and the fact that I need a job for her. I gave her a part-time teaching job in JC because that's what I had. So I gave her my job, although mine was in painting, not in whatever. So he says, just like this, the palace of wisdom, the road of wisdom leads to the palace of excess. William Blake. And I said, it's in the script. I put it in over, and all he says is William Blake, and she says William Blake. That's the end of the scene.
Right.
And yet it was perfect because I don't know why. It was just a perfect line. It was a non sequitur. I probably couldn't have come up with it except in the crisis of we have to address how what she looks like this.
It's great. And you know, big players make big plays. He made one. So there you go. So, explain how your baseball training helped prepare you as a first-time director to get what you wanted from your actors on a first or second take. That really impressed me, how you described that.
Well, I do a lot of rehearsal and a lot of, which we call practice. That's the sports term. Let's call it practice. Tommy Lee Jones later called it practice. That's why I call it practice. A lot of movies don't spend time rehearsing. So rehearsal is a time to get our good ideas, our bad ideas, try some things. I do the fixes at night. We rewrite, we replay it again a couple of days later, because I'm the writer director. I don't want to be fixing scenes in the middle of the shoot. I don't have time. I'm too tired. So I want to get it as ready as possible and the actors to be completely ready to go when they arrive at the set every morning at 6:30 or 7 or whatever it is. I want the camera people to realize, oh, we got to be quick because the cast is ready. I mean, every set I've ever been on, the camera crew always remarks about how prepared the cast is. Well, that's a sports model. That's the sports model. Because most of sports, to anybody who plays at any level, most of it is practice. Most of it is rehearsal. The actual game time is very little. So the game time is action. That's the game time. You know, it's like those 7-hour Super Bowls that have about 9 minutes of action in them.
Yeah.
You know, or any college football game on television now. So, or pro, even worse. So that's the athletic model. Prepare, and then let go, and then go. And I found that I've worked with a lot of big name, really fine actors, and most of them are happy on the first or second take. I mean, Kurt Russell, why do you need another take? It's perfect. Gene Hackman. And I say, good for me, good for you, good, let's go. But I always let the actor have another one if they want it.
Right.
So I don't think I've ever done 10 takes, unless there was a camera problem.
That's a good way to be able to make your budget. So in every production, weird stuff happens. You had more than your share. Now tell us about when the real Crash Davis shows up.
Well, the name Crash Davis came from a Caroline Lee record book that I was browsing through because I find it kind of peaceful looking at those kind of things, because you realize 1934, some guy named Bobo Newsom pitched for the Durham Bulls and won 17 games. And you realize there's a life there. There's an entire life in these numbers, all these numbers. And in 1947 or something, I come across the name Crash Davis. And I thought, I wish that was my name. That's the best name I've ever heard, Crash. And I'd never heard that as a nickname. And he had 50 doubles. Well, I led a league in doubles, so I liked Crash Davis. And that became the name for the character, before I'd even written it. I had Crash Davis, and I had Ebby Calvin-Nucleluche from another similar story. But so I'm assuming Crash Davis, who played in 1947 in Durham, is long gone because nobody lives where they play their last year in the minor leagues. I don't live in New York. So I thought this name of the public record, I can use it. the night before our first day of shooting, you had a call in our office, said, young production assistant came in and she said, Crash Davis is on the phone. And I assumed it's Kevin. I said, tell Kevin I'll call him right back. I'm in the middle of something. And I figured he wanted to go over something for the first day of shooting. And she comes back and says, no, he says he really is Crash Davis. I went, ask him how many doubles he hit in 1947. She comes back and says, 50. And I went, oh my God, it's the real Crash Davis. So I take the phone, and this most elegant, buttery North Carolina drawl, he said, my name is Lawrence Crash Davis. And my daughter and granddaughter tell me you're making a movie about him, making a movie about me. And I said, no, sir, Mr. Davis, but I'd love to use your name for the character. What do you know? And she says, my daughter and granddaughter say there's a young man named Kevin Costner playing me, and I just think I'd like to know more about this. And I said, oh my God, he's going to not let me use his name. So I said, well, we're on the set at this location tomorrow, just drop by. So I'm shooting, and it's the backyard scene, which is, I think, one of the very first scenes we shot, where Nuke is on this little mound, and the woman, the girl, Jenny, played by Millie, played by Jenny Robertson, is catching in full catcher's mitt. And I look over, and there's this elegant guy in this blazer. I mean, I don't know how old he was. He's probably late 60s. And I went over there, and they said, Crash Davis is here. I go over there. I said, I introduced myself, and I said, well, the movie's not about you. I love your name. I think you'll be proud of the movie. It's, you know, da, da, da. And I said, I just need permission to use your name. And he said, tell me, young man, do I get the girl? And I said, indeed, you do get the girl. And that's the girl over there. Susan, get over here. And Susan came over and charmed the heck out of him. And he was just the most charming guy in the world. And he started a new career. He had retired. He'd been like the head of human resources at Burlington ever since he played in the minor leagues. And well-known businessman in the South, huge family. And he went on the road after that doing speaking engagements as, I am the real Crash Davis, and I have the real stories for you. And he would tell stories. He's a very funny guy. I put him in a movie later on, years later.
That's great. Well, you talk about how little problems in making a movie often lead to big problems. And here you had this desire to capture what a minor league bus really looks and feels like. You create this contraption, this Kontiki rig, which is, you call the hat on the bus, that somehow rubs the studio executive the wrong way. And so this eventually, you know, nearly blows up your movie over this little thing. Can you just briefly say how this fire burned out of control?
Well, this happens everywhere in all aspects of life around the globe, and always has. You know, World War I was an accident. You know, Archduke of Serbia backs up this way instead of that way. He gets murdered. The whole Europe falls apart. And, you know, just watching Ukraine. What if we did this? Might that not have happened? What if we went into Crimea? I mean, I'm just saying, little things get out of control in war, so they certainly get out of control in a movie. There was a production executive on the set. Now that means he's somebody who's familiar with, you know, the problems of production of equipment moving, and just, you know, it's a circus. It's like an army you're moving around every day in. It's all happening okay. But what they usually do is call in problems when they perceive them. And in the bus, and I get that un-Hollywood lit look. I mean, it was actually perfect of what I wanted. It just looked up. So he started reporting back to the studio in LA. They've got this contraption, it looks ridiculous. And so the word spreads in the hall, the way things do. It's the telephone game. Have you heard? Have you heard? In Durham, they've got this. They don't know what to do. Crises were I was almost got fired. The director of photography got fired, and he'd done and I tell you all the beautiful stuff of Susan he shot. He shot 7 things for Spielberg. He was pretty good, I think. And it just grew like, crazy. And little problems became big problems. And then you can't even remember where the fire started.
Right. And that just.
Yeah, and the stuff on the bus is exactly what I wanted it to look like. Not like a Hollywood movie set.
Right. And one more production thing that happens at time, you wisely saved the big sex scene for the end of the shoot. Very smart decision. And yet you almost didn't get to shoot it. So tell us what happened and how you saved it.
Well, we were fighting for time. We were starting to go over schedule. That's what understandably makes producers nuts. And you start cutting pages out of the script, some of which I cut out that I think needed to be cut out. I'm happy when I can cut them out. And I gave the second unit, that's a small unit, some things that I didn't need to shoot. So we were kind of managing our way to the finish line, but the producer was very nervous. One of the producers, the guy that Tom Mount, and we had 2 days left, and it was the sex scenes for 2 days, and the lovemaking, let's call it. And he said, "You can't shoot it." I said, "Why?" He said, "We're over budget." I said, "We're not over budget." He said, "Well, you're on budget, but you're going to go over budget in post-production." I said, "I promise you I will not." He said, "We have to have a little breathing room for post-production." I said, "We have to have these two days of shooting." And he said, "I want you to pull the plug." I said, "I'm not going to pull the plug. I'm going to go shoot." "You want to pull the plug? You come on the set and you tell the cast that they're not going to do these scenes. And then later tell the audience that we spent an hour and 40 minutes leading up to them making love and we don't get there." I said, "You'll kill the movie." And so those 2 fun days on screen were incredibly tense. And, but I just stayed the course and kept shooting and kept shooting and kept shooting. And of course, it's in the movie, it's joyful because we've taken the whole movie to get to it. And we see these 2 people finally having fun. And that was the other goal, to make sex scenes fun, because this is '88 and sexual paranoia and this thing called AIDS was starting to be written about. And all of a sudden, everybody forgot for 20 years that sex was fun at one time. And I said, "Let's make this fun." People are desperate to have fun. And the cast, which is not easy, I've got my clothes on. They don't. Right. They just were fabulous. They trusted me by that time. They trusted each other, and they had fun. And that's why it works.
Yeah. And then when editing the film, you discover that the scene that you had shot in the whorehouse where Nuke finds Crash is a big problem. And you had to solve it because you're looking at the scene and it just can't work.
Yeah, the scene itself played well in the sense that Kevin was good, everybody was good, but that's when Tim comes and says, "I've been to big leagues." But why the hell is it in a whorehouse? And that was a really bad idea that the writer had. And sometimes when you're a writer-director, that doesn't mean the director can't get pissed off at the writer and vice versa. So I screened the movie for the studio, and you would know this trick, Jim. I could have tightened the scene and made it less egregious, and I left it long and clumsy and awkward so it would really stick out as something that's odd. And that was a deceitful trick I learned by the hands of some of the best editors in town. And when Mike Medavoy said, "We really liked the movie," finally, for the first time, "What would you do to change it?" I said, "I want to redo the whorehouse scene." He said, "Well, just write it up." And I said, "I can do it in LA. I can recast." He said, "We got Kevin, we got Tim." So I gave him, and I just handed him the script. It was the original script of the whorehouse scene, except it was now in a pool hall, and I did not change a line of dialogue. Not a line.
Right.
He was playing the piano in the whorehouse when Nuke comes in. Now he's shooting pool. He's playing pool. Everything else was identical, which is kind of a fluky, freaky thing, but it worked perfectly. And we reshot it, and it's great. And Kevin is great in it. And I recast the actor who plays Sandy Grimes, the old veteran, the African-American veteran who owns the place, who Kevin looks up to, because it gives him a chance to share that there's people he admire. This is one of them. And
Right.
so it was just one of those, it was kismet. It worked perfectly.
Right. So before the Q&A, I just have to ask one more question. And that is, whenever I mention Bull Durham to somebody, they always say, oh, that was a great movie. But I urge all of you here tonight to read the book and watch the movie again. It's even better than you remembered. So I want to ask you, Ron, about one amazing scene with no dialogue. Crash, just been released from the team. He's walking to Annie's house, though we don't know that for sure at the time. His shadow's cast on what I think is the ballpark wall. And watching it again, it struck me that Crash has been separated from his own spirit. And so the ending, while not a traditional third act, beautifully restores his body and soul. So call me crazy, but it seems to me that this is where your baseball career and religious upbringing merge together in this haunting artistic image. I mean, just watching him walk past. What did you think when you saw the dailies?
Well, I thought we had it when we shot it, because those are tobacco warehouses that are empty. They surround the ballpark.
Yep.
They are now high-end condos, by the way, but they were empty. And I thought, I think even in the script, I would have several images of him walking the streets. And then I wanted that shot of him just alone in another pool hall, just a single shot. And the truth is, that's the shot. I didn't need more shots after that shot you described. You know, there's not 4 shots of him walking the street. There's 1 shot of him walking the street.
Right.
Because once I saw the way it was working, I said, "We're done. We don't need those other 3 shots. Get him to Annie's house." And as you say, and it's a restoration. Body and soul. There are still. One can leave the church, but I think the ideas and the themes remain, and they become stronger in a secular context.
Yep. So I think now, and that's such a beautiful, beautiful shot. I think we'll turn it over to the Q&A here.
All right. Yeah, well, I'm taking a look at the questions here. The scene where Annie gives Nuke his nickname is always jarred with me. Was there a longer version of it originally, or a completely different explanation?
Well, no, it's exactly as scripted. He's a nuclear meltdown because he's in bed, he's tied up, he's thrashing about, and nuclear meltdown is almost like you'd say to a child, you know, you look like what is this nuclear meltdown? Come on, relax. Except we don't know his nickname is Nuke until the next morning. She just calls him a nuclear meltdown. And then when he comes in, they call him Ebby, and he says, "Nuke, that's my new nickname, Nuke." So it's sort of it's a piece of information that's revealed in 2 parts. First part by her, second part in the clubhouse.
And there was you had a nice story where you found the play-by-play announcer for the movie.
Well,
Where did you find him?
I wanted an authentic voice, not an actor feigning a bad Southern accent for the announcer, because that's so evocative when you hear the real deal. And about 3 days before shooting, I fell asleep in front of the television in my hotel room, and I woke up and the David Letterman show was on, and he was interviewing some guy who was a moonshine revenue agent, undercover agent, somewhere in the South. And he was one of the most entertaining characters, and he was so talkative that even Letterman, who likes to overwhelm his guests, pushed the chair back and let the guy go. And then I fell asleep again. I don't know who it was. And the next morning I called Bonnie Timmerman, the casting director in New York, and I said, find out who the revenue agent was, the moonshine guy on Letterman last night. And I want him. And his name was Garland Bunting. And it turned out books had been written about him. And he was already the next day back in Scotland Neck, North Carolina. And I drove an hour and a half that night and had dinner with him and his wife and hired him on the spot. And he is the real deal. He's one of the most fascinating characters. He can do whole books of the Bible, King James Version meets North Carolina. And I put him in the Paul Newman movie, Blaze, as well. I liked him so much.
In the book, you present a possible sequel idea to Bull Durham. Can you give a little detail about that?
Well, it'll never happen. That's the first thing. Everybody's too old. Well, the setup, it took me forever to find a setup. And by the time I found a setup, I wasn't interested in doing it, and everybody was too old. The idea is Crash and Annie. The problem with a sequel is it kind of destroys this sort of magical love story, because you have to start the sequel with they're not together. So audiences are going to be pissed off before you're 5 minutes into the, she's not going to be a traveling support system for a minor league manager. And so they're going to release each other and hold on to the torch. And he's now somewhere in the Casper Ghosts in Wyoming managing. She's gone to Sorbonne, where she's a PhD in Piaf. And he works his way up to Durham again, because Durham is now big fancy. The city's completely reborn, and it's a AAA town. So as before, Durham was the step to oblivion. Now it's the next step to where he always wanted to get, the major leagues. So Durham now stands for something different. And Nuke, who has been a kind of a hot and cold bust in the majors without the tutelage of Crash and Annie, he is discovered by Robert Wool, the pitching coach, who is now a scout. Nuke is now in Venezuela learning a knuckleball in the Venezuelan leagues. And he's actually maybe pretty good at it, like Jim Bouton in his 40s. So Robert Wool gets him signed, and he gets sent to AAA to guess where? Durham. And Annie comes back to teach for a special year, a year at Duke in the whatever chair, and they're all reunited. It sounds better than it is, because you can't. They're in different places in their lives. I mean, she's not going to bed Nuke anymore. So it's one of those pitches that I could sell, and then I would regret selling it, because it's kind of a fake pitch. It's not as good as it sounds. You know those, Jim, right?
Oh, yeah.
And why do you think people like Sports Illustrated honor Bull Durham as a classic? What qualities, or what do you think why people like it?
Well, it's funny, and I think the characters are flawed in a way that we see ourselves in them. And then something that I've come to realize over the years, trying to answer that question, Crash loves something more than it loves him back. That's a universal. That's way bigger than sports. Who of us have not loved somebody, a person, a job, a career, a passion, more than we've gotten back out of it? That's pretty universal. And Annie and Crash, in a certain way, are at the same point in their lives, because they've both been playing boys' games, playing with boys, really. And that lasts for a little while, but it doesn't sustain. For her, it means she's a fabulous character she's invented, but are you really gonna, if you're gonna be sleeping with 19-year-old boys the rest of your life, it's a Tennessee Williams tragedy. The good thing about the 20-year-olds leaving it the season is that she doesn't have to face a real relationship, because real relationships are the hardest thing in the world, and we all know that. And because they're so difficult, and for all parties. And so Crash comes into her life unexpectedly, and is triggered, how this, but it's also her own system that gets her in trouble. Because, you know, I mean, one look at Crash and why aren't they off together? Well, because she's got to do her thing, and her thing is fabulous, but it's also, she's hoisting her own petard in a way.
Yeah.
Crash won't play the game. He's not going to try out. So she's stuck with him, and she's too proud to say bad idea. He's too proud to say, come on, let's go have a drink and figure this out. And because Nuke really doesn't care that much. He doesn't even realize what he has till years later, probably. So they're both at that reckoning point. And I think it's about reckoning. And that's the other thing that's universal, besides loving something more than it loves you back, that we all face these moments of reckoning, sometimes more than one, where you have to change what you do, change what you love, and take chances and risks on a new direction. And it might be another person, it might be a job, it might be whatever. So I think those things resonate, and maybe that's why it appeals to people who don't even care about baseball. But that's just me trying to figure it out.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, one more question, and it's from my own as a Tigers fan, related to the Ty Cobb movie. Ernie Harwell, how did you get connected with him, and how did you get him to appear in the movie?
I might have just reached out and said, how do I reach Ernie Harwell? And I spent quite a bit of time with Ernie, and he told some stories about Cobb that even I hadn't heard, that furthered his image as a troubled soul. And there's been a whole movement to rehabilitate Ty Cobb's image, which I quite resent. I think it's based on selective, cherry-picked reasoning and research, to be honest. Harwell's a very nice guy. He's a good Christian man. He never cursed. He never, he wasn't prone to gossip, but he just told stories about God that aren't even in the movie, by the way. So there's a whole, in fact, I spent a day shooting in Tiger Stadium that I cut out of the movie. I cut it out. At the end of the movie, it's when the writer comes back and looks at Tiger Stadium, because it's it was my favorite ballpark. I mean, I liked it more than Fenway and Wrigley and everything. I just, it was so old school. I love the cavernous feeling. I don't know. I love Tiger Stadium. And that's how I knew Ernie. And Ernie later visited my dad when he was ailing, and just a sweet man.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Well, thank you very much. It's been a great talk. Thank you to Ron, and thank you to Jim. Ron's book is available everywhere, especially at Literati Bookstore in Ann Arbor. Yep, exactly. And thank you for your time, and have a good night.
Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it. Jim,
I'll be in touch. I'll send you an email. I'll get your email.
great.
Okay,
Thank you.
it's great.
Okay.
Bye-bye.